In this video, I'll show you how to manage the life cycle of an upstream Kubernetes cluster deployed on bare metal or virtual machines using the GitOps workflow. Now, as part of this process, there are 3 steps. You should have a GitOps pipeline. Then you have to create cloud credentials. Then you will use Git commands to push your cluster manifest changes to create or to manage the cluster using Git. Now let's go to the Rafay platform. I'm on the Rafay platform. Now first, I already have a Git pipeline created. Now to create this pipeline, you should first create an agent. I already have an healthy agent deployed on a machine as a Docker container. First is agent and second is repository. Now this is the repository where all my manifests will be stored. Now I'm using this repository. It's a private repository. If you see, this is a private repository. All my cluster manifests are stored in this repo, and I'll be using this repo to drive the GitOps workflow. Now, once the pipeline is ready, created, the second step in this process is to create cloud credentials. Now, what does cloud credential contain? Cloud credential contains your agent, the GitOps agent. Agent will also drive the end-to-end automation of this cluster provisioning. When I say end-to-end automation, now the agent has to be deployed. Now if I go, let me show you before I show you, right? If you see this diagram, the agent is deployed in the same private cloud where your nodes or VMs or cluster infrastructure resides. Right? This agent should be able to connect to the nodes which are going to be part of the cluster. Now let's create a cloud credential. Now cloud credential should have agent associated to it. So I just created a GitOps agent, and which I just showed you. This agent should have credentials to connect to the nodes, right? So I'm giving the username that I have. Username, this could be any username. For this demo, I'm using which has username as Ubuntu, port is 22, and in this you have to give a private key which the agent will use to connect to the nodes and run the installer. Now for this demo, I just created a temporary private GitOps agent. The agent will use to connect to the nodes to run the installer. Now the cloud credential is ready. Now let me go back to the diagram, right? This agent should be, as I said again, this agent should be able to connect to the nodes which you are going to use to create the cluster. Basically, these nodes will be part of the cluster. Either it could be worker nodes or master nodes. Now if you see, I created a second step was to create a cloud credential. Now let's validate this cloud credential. So if you see, this is a valid cloud credential, which means I'm able to connect to the agent. The platform is able to connect to the agent, and agent is healthy as well. Now third step, the final step is basically now we have all steps are done. Now we are good to go and start pushing the Git, start using the Git commands to push the cluster manifest. Now if you see, I have a cluster manifest prepared. If you see, now it has this cloud credential that I just created. If you see, I created this cloud credential, and it has all the rest of the configuration like node details. I have a node which I'll be using to create a cluster. This node will be a hybrid node, as in it will act as both worker node as well as master or control plane node. Now I already have a spec. Now to create a cluster, I'll just use Git commands to push this manifest to the Git and commit it. And if you'll see, the cluster will start getting provisioned in this platform using the GitOps workflow. Now let's do that, right? I already have this cluster manifest. Let's do git status, do git add, do git commit, origin main. Then the moment you push the changes, you will see a pipeline would have gotten triggered. Now if I go to pipeline, you'll see, if you click on the pipeline, if you'll see because as part of the pipeline, I have 2 stages as part of the pipeline. I have an approval stage and I have a system sync stage. Now first, basically, actually gets triggered, somebody has to approve it. Now I am the approver for this. I'm the self approver. I'll just approve it. Once I approve it, it will basically go to the submitted state. Submitted state means it basically applied the cluster manifest on the platform. And if you go to the cluster, you will see the cluster basically started. Now if you see, what was the cluster name? Cluster demo MKS3. The cluster started getting created and start getting provisioned. Now if you see, the node which was part of the cluster, which was part of this cluster, actually got discovered. Now within some time it will basically get approved, and finally the cluster will start getting provisioned. Now if you see, the cluster provisioning actually started. Now let's give it some time until the cluster is fully provisioned and it will be up and running. Now if you see, the cluster is actually provisioned. So actually the Kubernetes cluster is actually created. Now it's basically syncing the blueprint. It's basically installing the Rafay operator on the cluster. So now if you see, all the Rafay operator pods are up and running, and let's look at the cluster. Now let's wait for it to become healthy. Now if you see, the cluster is healthy, and the Rafay blueprint is also successful. Back to the same file. Now if you see, there's a Kubernetes version. Now the latest version is 1. If I go to the latest version is 1.29, and current Kubernetes version is right now 1.28.9. Now let's update this to the next version, 1.29.4, using GitOps. Now let's do git status. Now let's add this file. I just update to 1.29. Let's do git push origin main. If you see, once I push the change, let's go back to the Git pipeline and approve the change. So now I just got an approval. Let's approve the change. Once I approve the change will get submitted. Now if you see, once I push the change, the upgrade has actually started. So if you see, it's actually doing the node upgrade from version 1.28 to 1.29. Now let's wait for upgrade to finish. So now if you see, the upgrade was also successful. Now in this way, you saw how you basically created the cluster and upgraded the cluster using the GitOps workflow. I hope you like it. Thanks for watching it. Thanks a lot.